we have yet another article from IGN about Dragon Age the Veilguard. And it has a lot of implications, I think, about what we may see from the next Mass Effect. So let's talk about that. In this article, it's by Alex Stegman, who's done a bunch of these articles. I believe they said this is the last one that they will be publishing. There is conversation about kind of how they decided to drop the keep system from Inquisition, which brought your choices from the previous games into that one, how they're kind of implementing things from Inquisition into this game, and kind of their whole philosophy behind that. I highly suggest going and reading this article in full. I'm not going to summarize it necessarily because I am more going to talk about how I think this game is going to inform us on how they may treat the next Mass Effect. Basically, in this article, they talk about a few things. They talk about how from the start, this game was always going to center around Solus, one of the characters from Inquisition, who reveals themselves at the end of the game as being this very important figure in the Dragon Age world, and how that never wavered. So, we've heard all these rumors and all this reporting on how Dragon Age 4, I'll call it, because it's gone through multiple names, had a multiplayer component at one point, and that got scrapped, and they went back to a more single player classic BioWare style of game. And that's literally what we're getting. We're getting very much that classic BioWare game, at least in a lot of ways. They also talk about how they're bringing back the protagonist from the last game, Inquisition, and how you're going to be able to choose, and this has been reported by some of the content creators and stuff as well, whether or not the Inquisitor romanced Solus or made other choices like shutting down the Inquisition and things like that, and how that's going to affect this game world that we're playing in. There was also a lot of discussion at the end of it from Epler, one of the creative directors on the game of Veilguard, about how, if they had choices that were going to be directly impacting the Veilguard that were going to be able to be picked, they wanted it to matter. They didn't just want to kind of throw things in there or half reference things, making them canon and such. They even talk about in the article about how, not every single thing that's happened in the previous games is going to be addressed in the Veilguard. So all of that is so interesting to me when you start thinking about the next Mass Effect. I think the first thing I would say, though, is that we shouldn't assume that anything they're doing with Veilguard is going to impact how they handle Mass Effect. If you look at Dragon Age Origins and 2 and Inquisition and how it handled the world state and moving from one game to the next, you could argue it couldn't have been more different than how they handled the Mass Effect trilogy. In the Mass Effect trilogy, you played as one protagonist, Commander Shepard, through all three games. In Dragon Age, you have three different protagonists. You have some reference and even appearances of previous antagonists or protagonists in the Dragon Age series, but you didn't play as the same character in all of them. You also arguably have three games in Dragon Age Inquisition and 2 and Origins that are just stylistically and gameplay wise like fairly unique to each other, where in the Mass Effect side of things that's not exactly the case. It's Mass Effect 1 compared to 2 and 3 is probably the most unique, where 2 and 3 feel very, very similar, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. That's a whole separate video to make. So I kind of preface this whole thing with, just because the Veilguard is handling things one way, I don't think we should instantly assume that's exactly what they're going to do with Mass Effect, because they've never really done that before. Though, I think there are some things we can talk about. I think the whole idea about how they felt like, the next game, what became the Veilguard, was going to be based around Solus basically from the start. I have to imagine they're in a similar situation with the next Mass Effect. They have the unique situation where we aren't just waiting for the first game since 3. We are waiting for the first game since 3 and Andromeda. And even though Andromeda, in my opinion, to this point, it was still basically them or BioWare or maybe EA being kind of, I don't want to say cowardly, but maybe that's the right word, and being scared to address the controversial ending to Mass Effect 3 that was improved but still considered very imperfect, as well as introducing three almost completely unique world states where it's not like you can just make the next game in the Milky Way and just I hope you can't just kind of hand wave it, and no matter what was picked at the end of 3, just say, oh yeah, that was strange when we all became half synthetic for a generation of creatures, and then that just went away, I guess. And I think that's where the quote from Epler, or the conversation, I believe that involved Epler, of saying like, we don't want to disrespect the choices that people made, but we also have kind of a responsibility to move this franchise forward, and allow this new protagonist to make their own story and things like that. And then talking about the Inquisitor being in the Veilguard and a NPC status, that comes to the conversation with Commander Shepard. There's a lot of conversation. I've had a lot of it, and others have as well, of whether or not Commander Shepard should be the protagonist in the next game, should appear as an NPC, similar to the previous Dragon Age protagonist, and now it's going to be the Inquisitor in the next game. Should they just be referenced as like a war hero who's been long dead? Should they not be mentioned at all? There's a lot of those conversations happening, and I appreciate the way it seems like Dragon Age has done it in the past and is going to do it with this next game. I know for me, the idea of an NPC Shepard is so hard, because even with the Dragon Age games, you play to someone different in every single game. So I'm sure people have connections to their protagonist in those games, but it's different than like the extremely iconic character that Commander Shepard is, and how attached people are to their Shepard, and the way that you basically probably couldn't really give people that same experience with the next game if you tried to have a Shepard just pop up, whether or not it's the default one that I think most people recognize as Shepard, either FemShep or MShep, or a custom one that you could customize, maybe the way that they've said that the Inquisitor can be customized. I just don't think that would work the same way. I think the reactions would be different. And I just, that's one of the ones where I kind of hope maybe they definitely take a different approach. I really think this whole thing is interesting though, because there's conversation about whether or not Mass Effect is even safe at this point, in that there seems to be a lot of people who are even relatively close to BioWare or to their community, who are still fairly certain that Mass Effect, while it's been worked on and it's been in pre-production for a long time, and they have all their directors in place and all that, it's not like they've gone into full production yet, and they likely won't until probably 2025 at the earliest, and there's just no guarantees. I think that we can be fairly certain. Like, it seems to me that Dragon Age, the Veilguard, is almost certainly going to get a decent Metacritic score. I would say high 70s, low 80s at the least. If it ends up being really, really good, I think it could be even higher, in like the mid 80s or even like low 90s if it really knocks it out of the park, which I would love to see it be in the Game of the Year conversation and such. But sales are going to matter too. This game's been in development for a long time. It's going to be a challenge for them to make their money back. And I think that hoping this game is going to sell 10 plus million, like it probably needs to, and maybe even better than that, knowing recently we found out that Inquisition sold way above their expectations, around the 12 or 13 million mark, I believe. All of that stuff makes any conversation about the next Mass Effect even tougher. But I think this was an interesting article to read if you're looking at it from the context of, wondering what they may do with the next Mass Effect, how they may handle Shepard, the canon endings, other canon choices. I'm one that, my final bit here will basically be that I am fine with them setting canon. I worry that if the next Mass Effect game tries to make, especially the three main endings, tries to just hand wave all those together or dismiss them completely, that they will have to make whatever comes next so generic or hand wavy, as I just referenced, that it would actually be more disrespectful to the players and their choices and the characters and the story than if you did just pick one canon ending and just go all in on it. My obvious preference is destroy. I think that's the ending that makes the most sense for moving the franchise forward. And I think you can do it in a way where you don't tell the people who prefer control or prefer synthesis that their choices don't matter, but we've just decided to go with this one. Because what people need to keep in mind, that maybe more so with Mass Effect than Dragon Age, with Mass Effect, the place they've left that game, lore wise and narrative wise, is it's very broad because of all the choices that could have been made in the trilogy. And I genuinely believe for that franchise to move forward and to be successful and to retell a story that you can impact and that you can, really get into, I feel like they really have to narrow that narrative scope and get it back down to a fairly tight, thing. And that will likely require them making canon choices and things like that, because then that allows them to then rebroaden and re-widen, that the realm of possibilities, where I feel like if they go into this next game already broad, it's going to make everything else so vague and potentially so simplistic, it may not be as interesting. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle things in the Veilguard. It's going to be interesting to see how those lessons inform what they do with Mass Effect, whether they use the same techniques or they do something completely different for various reasons. I know I'll be talking a lot about it. So if you want to get all of that conversation, be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you like the video, please hit that like button. If you want to give me your thoughts on all of this, leave them down in the comments below. If you really want to support all of my content, please consider becoming a YouTube member, where you get videos like this one a little bit early and some other cool perks. If you want to support my content or check out the other things I do, please click the link in the description of the channel and the video. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.